I am so delighted to introduce President Martha Pollack, who is a well-known scientist in her own right, but also, of course, the president of Cornell, who has kindly agreed to introduce this event to all of you. And welcome, everyone, and thank you for spending your day or your night or wherever you are with us. Please, Martha.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And good evening, everyone. It is really great to have you back on what I think of as the virtual hill for this 2021 reunion. Obviously, I really wish I could be chatting with all of you under a tent on the Arts Quad while we were maybe eating some Cornell ice cream. But I have to say, one of the silver linings of these virtual events is how many Cornell alumni were able to welcome back from all over the world. So wherever you are right now, welcome back to Cornell. I hope you're having a great reunion. Now, whether it's your 5th reunion or your 75th, you've probably all seen at least part of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, the award-winning PBS series that for years remained the most widely watched series in the history of American public television. It had more than 500 million viewers across 60 countries. And of course, we were very fortunate to have Carl Sagan here as a professor, and we're so glad now to be home to the Carl Sagan Institute, an interdisciplinary center that spans more than 15 departments, a place where biologists and physicists and astronomers and engineers and chemists all come together to work towards answers to the cosmic questions that Professor Sagan captivated the world with more than 40 years ago. And tonight's event, it's a really special cosmic conversation, because here to join us for this Distinguished Carl Sagan Lecture is none other than Ann Druyan, Peabody and Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, and director, who with her late husband, Carl Sagan, co-wrote the Cosmos series and 6 New York Times best-selling books, including Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, and I love this title, The Demon-Haunted World. She joins us tonight in conversation with Professor Lisa Kaltenegger, director of the Carl Sagan Institute at Cornell, associate professor of astronomy, and current inhabitant of Professor Sagan's old office in the Space Sciences building. So please join me in virtually welcoming Ann Druyan.
President Pollack, thank you so much for that lovely welcome. I'm so happy to be with you and so many Cornellians, and looking at 4 lovely, strong, brilliant women who are all making such a great contribution to our world.
Thank you so much, President Pollack. Thank you so much, Ann, for joining us today. And we have asked people to send us some questions. So I have a lot of questions. I will not be able to ask you all of them, so we had to make like a cut. And if you want to actually ask Ann a question, please put your questions in the Q&A. Down there, you see a Q&A. So you can put your questions in there. In about 20 minutes, we will actually go to the Q&A and use some of the questions from there to ask Ann. So it's your chance, if you have a burning question for Ann, to put it in there to hear more about it. And so I will just get started and ask you some of the questions that came in. And one, of course, is about your incredible talent to compellingly communicate science. And there were a lot of questions that came in to say that in this time where science is under siege in a way, what you think are the most important things to keep in mind when you're communicating science, or which compelling ways you have found that actually most effectively communicate science.
Carl used to say, when he was asked, he had a scientific career, he was a writer, he was a poet, he was a brilliant teacher. He did so many things so well. And people would say, well, why are you doing this science communication? Why all this public outreach? At the time that he started out, there was a fair share of opprobrium from the scientific community to scientists who were outward facing. And he would always say, when you're in love, you want to tell the world. And I think that's the most effective way to communicate. People absolutely know if you're speaking to them with contempt, if you're looking down on them, if you're only using your knowledge to pump yourself up and to make them feel somehow lesser. But if you approach a magnificent subject of nature and you have these precious treasures, these little bits of successive approximations of reality that you're able to gather and to share with others, you must. And I'd like to say, I know that Cornell has moved in the direction of having a communications minor for science majors. And I think that's exemplary. I think that's wonderful. I would like to argue that anyone pursuing a degree in science, and especially an advanced degree in science, should have a requirement for a course on storytelling, on communication. We are a story-driven species. And I found that when I was studying science in school, I felt as if it had been denuded of all its drama, of all the things that I, as a non-scientist, would find compelling. And I think that's unfortunately still largely true. As we see science attain a degree of maturity as a field, I'm reminded of what Albert Einstein said at the opening of the New York World's Fair. He said, if science is ever to fully fulfill its mission in the same way that art does, and of course he was talking about the way that movies and paintings and plays and novels can touch us, and what was the Kafka's phrase? When you can melt the frozen sea inside us, can impel us to act. And now, in our moment in history, when it is so imperative that all of us shoulder the challenge, the responsibility of dealing with climate change and massive environmental degradation, we have to be able to think critically. We have to internalize the values of science. And so what Einstein was saying is that if science is ever to fulfill its mission as fully as art, its inner meaning must penetrate into the consciousness of everyone. So that's what inspires me in my work. I'm not a scientist, I'm just a hunter-gatherer of stories. But for me, science has provided the greatest spiritual uplift of my life because it's made me feel a part of something, even as it's taken away my personal centrality in the universe. It's made me feel a part of an ancient 4 billion year continuity of life, which is much more thrilling than, than the other versions of creation. It's made me feel my responsibility to be mindful and to act assertively, to protect in a loving and conscientious way this beautiful planet. And so, I think that the real question is, we're all wondering if we're going to survive, or our civilization will survive the big shadow, the long shadow that's cast on our future for our children and grandchildren and theirs. And I think part of the answer to that question, because I'm very hopeful, I'm even optimistic, is that if we're to accomplish this, it will take a worldwide, global, concerted effort, aware of the dangers, fully cognizant of all of the things that we have to do to set our world right. And so I think when you talk to people about the things that mean the most to you, you can be most persuasive. And that's my philosophy of science communication, speak from the heart with conviction and be open to find out that you're wrong, the greatest strength of science of all.
When you were talking about the gathering and finding all these new stories, there were a couple of questions where people thought to ask you what you think is actually some of the most interesting recent scientific discoveries that you've heard of. Do you want to elaborate?
It's like a great fire hose of discovery. At the same moment that we're sort of trembling on the brink of some terrible changes on our planet, the same moment that we're squandering the birthright of this magnificent planet, we're also so clever and so stupid at the same time. Our stupidity is our short-sightedness, our valuing money over air and water and climate, the most fundamental things that any entry-level organism needs in order to survive. So, as far as I'm concerned, every single day is a spectacular series of discoveries. I look at Insta or I look at social media, and there's a barrage of information that I can then pursue in scientific journals and more serious articles. The most amazing thing, I want to think of something meaningful and not just a flavor of the month kind of insight. I tell you what, Lisa, give me a few minutes to think about this, and then let's go to the next question. And then before the end of our chat, I hope I'll have an answer for you.
Absolutely. And I think, the great thing about having a fire hose of things like landing a rover on Mars, trying to figure out how deep the oceans on Titan is, finding new worlds, like all of this, I would be really hard pressed to pick any favorite. So I gave you the question because nobody's asking me, luckily.
Exactly.
There were a couple of questions about when you were the artistic director to put together the Golden Record. I don't know if there's a story that you wanted to share about the excitement of this time. I think you talked to me once about the launch, that you were all like really excited when the launch happened just because you didn't know if it would actually get going. I don't know if that's the story that you want to share or generally.
When I think of Voyager, and I think every single day, actually, and I have been thinking about it for some 45 years, and I still marvel at it. In fact, three young scientists in the Netherlands, just in the last month, plotted the course of the two Voyagers into its 5 billion year future, plotting the stars that Voyager will come closest to, positing that it not only will it survive the collision of the Andromeda galaxy with the Milky Way galaxy, but also that at that point it could be expelled into intergalactic space. And they painted this lovely picture of the two little spindly spacecraft, so intrepid, so brave, so far flung, having made their dozen circumnavigations of the whole galaxy before being expelled and covered in this lovely hydrogen frost they were imagining. And they said that the B-side of the record would be most likely to outlast everything else. What is my Voyager record story? Well, the deepest one is the love that Carl and I discovered during the making of the record. We were setting out in 6 months with no money to create an artifact with half a dozen colleagues, an artifact that would speak for us after the continents of the earth would be unrecognizable to us, after everything that we know would likely be gone. And yet this would still be, the record of our culture, our civilization. What a daunting task, 6 months. We wanted to include every single musical tradition on earth, not to be the chauvinists telling the story of the people who specifically designed the spacecraft and launched it, but instead seeing it really as a representation of our whole planet and of all the different ways to be human and to be alive. And so during the course of this just epic, mythic feat, I mean, imagine picking the piece of music that had moved you most deeply and conferring a kind of immortality on it so that it would be part of this Noah's Ark of human culture. And just in the last weeks of this feverish effort to gather the whole story of what it is to be alive and to be human, we discovered how deeply we loved each other. We had worked together for many years and been friends. And suddenly we realized that we were in love. And it was within 2 days that I went to NYU Medical Center and was blindfolded and hooked up to all these sensors that would be recording my rapid eye movement, my brain waves, my heartbeat, all of the noise that my nerves and my body was making. And it was in the flush of this great love that I got to meditate for an hour about the story of our planet, best of my ability, the story of our species and our current predicament. Well, that was in 1977. That was when there were some 60,000 nuclear weapons on Earth, on hair triggers. And that was a time that looked dark as well. And many people despaired at that time, but we somehow managed to inch away from that insanity, as I hope we will with this current insanity. And so at the end of this little meditation, Annie's History of the World, Part 1, I was able to think about the meaning of the varieties of experience of love, of the parental familial love, of the love that adults feel for each other. And I guess that's my favorite story of the record, because those two spacecrafts are now the most distant objects ever touched by human hands. They completed an epic reconnaissance of the planets and moons of the almost outer solar system. And they took that picture at Carl's behest of the pale blue dot. And of course, he was the one who wrote that magnificent meditation on what it is, what our true circumstances are. And so when I think of the Voyagers, I think they are, in my mind, in a way synonymous with Carl for this reason. Because in the Voyagers, our engineering and mathematical and scientific brilliance are demonstrated. The Voyagers were launched 20 years after Sputnik. Nothing had ever left the planet before Sputnik. And 20 years later, after sending this little metal ball into Earth orbit, we were mounting interstellar missions and reconnoitering the outer planets. We can do these hard things. We're so smart. But the reason I think of Voyager and Carl together as synonymous is that Voyager not only is one of the greatest achievements in human history, scientifically, technically, but it also has at its heart that record, our music, our images, our greetings, and not just human greetings, but greetings of some of the other Earthlings with whom we share this planet. And so it seems to me that what is called for now are hearts and souls and brains that not only are willing to do the hard work to learn the difficult subjects, to become scientists and engineers and mathematicians and technicians, but also to retain at your core that feeling of the greatest glory of being alive.
I think you just made space engineering romantic. I think this is one of the first times that I would say that is
my goal.
That is really expressed that space engineering is really romance at heart, and engineering has just the worst rep, right? It should have a much more romantic vision. And when you were describing this, one of the things that I was thinking about is like, I don't know if anybody has seen, but with the Carl Sagan logo is basically this Earth with a fingerprint on it, and then these other two objects, planets in a way in the far future, or what we're finding right now around other stars, that we hope to find life on. But what is on it, like on the first planet, the closest one, the biggest one in our logo, is actually a fingerprint. It's a human fingerprint, and it's actually an anonymous fingerprint, so it could be anyone. And the other ones don't have fingerprints because we don't know what life on other worlds could be. But where I'm going with the story is that after we inaugurated the Carl Sagan Institute here at Cornell, and we were sitting together with Annie and the person who made our logo, and then there was this really great discussion going on that apparently there exists fingerprint of Carl Sagan because you were arrested, right?
Yes, I've been arrested many times, I'm proud to say. And Carl and I were arrested at the Nevada nuclear test site during the Reagan administration when Gorbachev had made a unilateral moratorium on testing, on underground testing. And the Reagan administration refused to join Gorbachev in doing that. And so we kept going to the Nevada nuclear test site repeatedly with the American Public Health Association. So all of these doctors and nurses, I think it was the largest act of civil disobedience up to that time. And so there is that fingerprint. And yes, I remember riding to jail with Carl, both of us probably happier than most people are when they're on their way to jail.
That sounds like another good explanation. There were a couple of questions about, I don't know, one thing about Carl that might not be as generally known that you might want to share or not, you know.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to. It's my favorite subject. And well, Carl was a fanatical basketball fan, and was actually the captain of his basketball team, which was at the University of Chicago, which was known for its lack of sports talent, but he was the captain of his basketball team. He loved basketball. And I remember I used to look in the Ithaca Journal in those days, excuse me, and I would be so thrilled when there was a Knicks game on locally, because I knew Carl would love that. He had the best laugh, which is also on the Voyager record. He had the best laugh of any person. It was the very first time I ever heard his voice. I was walking down a hallway and I was going to a dinner party at Nora Ephron's house. And the door was slightly ajar, and I heard this laugh that was so free, so uninhibited, so natural. And I thought, who is that? And the door opened, and there was Carl. First time I ever saw him, lying on Nora Ephron's living room rug with his hands clasped behind his head, just roaring with laughter. And yeah, I mean, I just, I am the lucky recipient of affection and respect from people all over the planet who've been touched by Carl. So many of them moved to become scientists, and people who just, not scientists, but people who feel that he opened the universe for them. And I always think to myself, if you only really knew him up close and could see the kind of human being that he was, you would be even way more blown away, because the wonder of him was that he was not only a great intellect, but he was someone who knew how to be happy and wanted to be happy and understood the great importance and beauty of happiness. And I just feel like that made him the most fully alive person that I've ever known.
Well, when we're asking for questions for you, we also got a lot of comments about people who actually knew Carl, who had Carl here at Cornell as a professor in their class, and who even told me about some classes that you did in the living room somewhere at home, some small critical thinking classes where he invited everybody over home. So
yes, I used to audit them. I audited all of his class. I loved watching him teach, and the critical thinking courses were great. And I think, God, I wish we could all have that kind of class to attend, to just think about, how when you're being lied to, it's such right now, when I hear about QAnon, I think that's the problem, is that, yes, they're skeptical of the government, great, but they're not skeptical of the stories that they want to believe. And that's where the greatest skepticism is absolutely critical. It has to be those ideas that you love the most. You have to be willing to look at them unflinchingly and see them, and maybe be willing to give them up if they prove not to be true.
I think for me personally, one of the things that was so astonishing is that the really, really early work by Carl Sagan is this idea. Some of his first PhD work was this idea to actually figure out why Venus is like it is. And currently, we're sending 2 missions back to Venus to figure out what it's really like and if it's really what the Earth is going to go to into the future, because the Earth is, of course, a beautiful planet a bit further away from the sun, so not as hot. But we, on one hand, with climate change, are making it a little bit uncomfortable here and can make it much worse. And also, the sun over billions of years will become larger and more luminous. And so his early work about actually tying what we see on Venus to this known effect of greenhouse effect on the Earth, and then a little bit later with some colleagues actually looking at Mars and figuring out that the whole sandstorms of Mars, so the small particles in Mars that make and influence Mars's climate a lot, would actually lead to a disaster if anybody were to use nuclear weapons on the Earth. I think that to me was one of the, he's known for so many things, and I love the idea of life in the clouds of Jupiters and other things, but I think that insight, like early on as a PhD students, to use other planets to understand our planet better, kind of what we're doing also when we're trying to find signs of life on other worlds in the solar system and outside, and also translating it back to the Earth here. I think to me, that's one of the things that I'm always still very impressed by, that he just made these first links.
I'm so happy you said that, Lisa. I couldn't agree more. A couple of thoughts. One is that if you go on YouTube, you can find Carl in 1962, I think, talking to camera about the possibility of life in the cloud tops of Venus. Just as a speculation, but something that undoubtedly at the time, made all kinds of his colleagues, just really livid. And last week, of course, NASA announces 2 missions to Venus, 1 to search for life in the cloud tops. And I'm just so proud of him, because it's exactly as you said, and that is that he was such a developed human being that his science was never compartmentalized. It was never in a kind of vacuum. He was a person of this world, this planet, and when he was the first person to know the temperature of Venus, and actually, I believe, coined the phrase runaway greenhouse effect in his PhD thesis. And I mean, the idea that he could be looking at Venus, he could be looking at the outer solar system or other galaxies but he was always thinking about us and about the implications for this planet. And for that reason, because of his work on Venus much earlier, in the very first Cosmos in 1980, we did a whole episode called Heaven and Hell about Venus, about its own climate past, and about the danger to our environment because of climate change. And I'm so proud of that. I mean, it's a little tragic because you think in 1980, you know, scientists and much earlier other scientists spreading the alarm about the greenhouse effect, going back to Svante Arrhenius. I mean, you know, it's just, the scientists did their job. They spread the alarm. They told us what was coming. But for some reason, we kept sleepwalking until recently and denying it. And we listened to the fossil fuel companies that pretended that there was no scientific consensus, even though from their own internal correspondence, we know they knew what was up. Imagine participating in that kind of ruining of the planet, even though you know that it's the same one that your grandchildren will have to live in. It's really surprising to me, but Carl was not that kind of man at all.
Let me, before we go to the Q&A from the audience, and again, if you have some questions, please just put it in the Q&A box here, and then we'll go after this last question that I have for Ann. Even so, there's a lot of them, but I want to keep some time for your questions today. So please just put it in the Q&A, and in about after this answer, we will go to the Q&A from the audience. And so, Ann, going to your work, you know, you have, of course, been the visionary with Carl behind the original Cosmos, but now you moved it into this new generation, actually inspiring this new generation for science and technology. And a lot of the comments that we got is that the new Cosmos, as well as the old Cosmos, has inspired people all over the world. But one specific question that I really also liked and I'm curious about is somebody was asking about how you envision the World Fair at the end of the Cosmos, you know, where you could talk to these different scientists and you'd get your answers and so on. So how do you come to the vision? Is this like you wanted to be there? This is what you want to be, because this is where I want to be. After I've seen that, this is where I want to be. But how did you get to this scene or to this end?
I grew up in Queens, site of the New York World's Fair. And Carl grew up in Brooklyn, and he said and he wrote that when he was 5 years old and taken to the 1939 New York World's Fair, it was the first time he realized that there was such a thing as science, and there was such a thing as the future, and that science was the way to get to the future. And that was the opening up the gates of the wonder world parted for him, and he was never the same. He was already on his trajectory that, which his life fulfilled and exceeded. And I'm younger than Carl was. And so for me, it was the 1964 World's Fair. And I, as I said, living in Queens, every day after high school, my brother had a job there, a summer job there. So I would get in free and I would just live in the world of tomorrow. And this vision of the future where there were no slums, where there was no hunger and deprivation, where everybody was dressed in Mylar and had really great haircuts, It was just like, wow. And it was very inspiring to me because it was global. It didn't have that kind of imperialistic, chauvinistic kind of, dominance hierarchy feel to it. Instead, it felt like a world that we could make happen. This was just, 5 years before we actually went to the moon. And that was so mythic. So I'm a lover of World's Fairs because to me, it was that first whiff of freedom because I was like a teenager and I could go, it was safe enough. You could go anywhere on your own, but it was also that idea, that dream of a world that was beautiful and healthy. And so that inspired me. years later, after Carl's death, the magnificent City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain, designed by Santiago Calatrava, such magnificent buildings. The most magnificent building is a planetarium that was dedicated to Carl, named after Carl. And they asked me to be there at the opening. And I saw this place and I thought, my God, this is a wonder of the world. And so when I was working on the third season of Cosmos, I kept thinking, wouldn't it be great to use this place and dress it up and create the World's Fair of my dreams of what it could be? Because it was such a powerful, impactful experience for anyone who was there. And so that's how it came about. And, this dream of being able to ask questions of the scientists in history, and not just, audio animatronic robots, but instead, beings whose connectomes, whose complete map of associations in the future could be accessed. And so it was irresistible. And luckily I had 986 other people working with me who were going to help me pull this off. And so, that we can't have World's Fairs now because of all of our, I don't have to name all the reasons, our violence, our pandemics, our all of these issues. But why not take the kids, the teenagers of now to a World's Fair that could make those promises for them so that they might be inspired the way that I was and Carl was.
Well, as I said, I would love to go to the one you envisioned. I was just like, I would just be standing there going through the time, figuring out how life was like, going through the calendar, talking to everyone, talking their ear off, asking questions,
I'm glad you liked it. I'm so thrilled.
And so
wonderful.
Because we're going to 7:40, so I'm going to ask Ryan who has been screening the Q&A, to ask us some of the questions from the audience. And also, I wanted to say that at around 8, Professor Nicole Lewis, the Deputy Director of the Carl Sagan Institute, will give you some insights of the newest science that have been going on here at the Carl Sagan Institute. But first, we're going to go to Ryan and see which Q&A or which questions you have from the audience for Anne.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually handle the Q&A. A little technical glitch. No worries. We got it under control. We have one question here that I think would be a great one to ask, which is, what made Cornell and Ithaca the right environment for so many years? I'm sure there were many other options for Carl to make his home and do his work.
Oh, that's a great question, Nicole. Carl, so in 1968, Tommy Gold, a great scientist of Cornell, invited Carl to Ithaca. And he took him to Upper Enfield, which is one of the most beautiful places. And I don't know if you've been to the gorge, you walk in that, you walk through a little bit of forest, and then you get to this trail, and suddenly there are stone bridges over rushing waters, and you can see the strata of 100,000 years. Just magnificent. And Carl always said that it was something, he felt something at that moment, in that afternoon at Upper Enfield. And he turned to Tommy and he said, okay, I'm coming. And he never regretted it. He loved Cornell. He loved Ithaca. And when Carl and I began our lives together, I was born in Queens, as I said. I was raised in Manhattan. And, I was really a city person. But the wonder of coming here in 1977, and I've lived here ever since, except for the years that I spent in LA producing. I love it here. I've been here for the entire pandemic and felt almost guilty because I love this area so deeply. Trees, the gorges, the waterfalls, the people, the animals, the other animals. So that's why he came. he had an epiphany at Upper Enfield.
So there's several questions also centered around, you're talking about how you get people engaged with science, and a lot of people are feeling, the rise of anti-science sentiment. And we would like to have your input on, how do we combat that? How do we turn people back and get them re-engaged? Like, what are your feelings about that?
We have a better story to tell than any other story. And that's the point. As I said earlier, I think it's very important to be respectful, to listen, to hear what moves people, what makes them believe these crazy things. Why, because it's not, a lot of this stuff isn't amenable to logic. It's not like you can say, well, X can't be true because of this. And then people say, oh, the scales have fallen from my eyes. Of course, you're right. It doesn't work like that. You have to make a human connection with another person, and you have to be willing to hear them out. And I've had many such conversations, and I've found that it's, if you're for real and if you are really trying to understand where they're coming from, then it's possible to make that connection. I think, not to be so referring to Carl so habitually, but I remember in the 1980s, there was a time when suddenly creation science, which of course isn't science at all, was asking for equal time in the school systems, in the curricula. And Carl went to testify in one of the southern states as a friend of the court for the ACLU. To testify against this idea of equal time for creation science. And I don't know, a year later, he got a letter from the creation science expert who had testified at the same trial. And he said, I want you to know that I quit my job after that trial. And I am now in school getting a degree in education. I want to teach biology. And the reason that I had this sea change in my life was because of you. And it was, if you had been less patient and less humble and less interested in what I had to say, that wouldn't have been possible. And I think that's really a huge part of this, is that people are afraid, to the extent that they are afraid of science, it's because it speaks a language, a jargon they don't understand. It makes them feel stupid. It makes them feel excluded. It makes them feel hopeless, that they will never be able to really wrap their heads around it. And so what is needed is several things. Nicole, you may be sorry you asked me this question, because I have so many thoughts on this. One is child rearing. We have to stop lying to our children. When we lie to our children about important things, like death, for instance, I think we doom them to perpetual infancy. And it's wrong. We have to be honest about, reality is good enough. Nature is plenty good enough. You don't have to make up stories and pretend that life and nature are not what they are, because it's the most precious thing that we have. So the child rearing is very important. In child rearing, if you don't know the answer to a question, because 4-year-olds and 7-year-olds ask the greatest questions, admit it. Let's find out. This was a sacred ritual when our kids were young, where they asked a question, we didn't know every answer. We would tell them, we don't know. What a great question. Let's go find out. First thing we do in those days was go to the Encyclopedia Britannica. And if that didn't work, the next day we were at the library. And I think it's just so important to honor curiosity, to honor questions, never to make a child feel embarrassed for asking a question, because that's the aperture to discovering the universe. That's really important. And I think in the educational system, I think we need to inspire our children from preschool up with the idea of this generation of searchers who have come before us, to whom we owe our current understanding of where we are and when we are in time, and the little bit that we do know about the universe. And I think we have to make them feel like they are joining this wonderful tradition, this community of minds that goes all the way back many thousands of years. And I think that's part of it. I also think we have to tell them the stories of the heroes of science, not to make them seem perfect. They all got things wrong. They were human, of course they did. But their commitment to finding out what is real, that is something that we have to honor. I think of the Voyagers, as we said, exceeding their design specifications by many, many decades, and doing everything they were asked to do. How many of us know who those engineers were? They were fired when the mission was over, because there were no big missions like that on the boards anymore. We don't even know. I know some names because I was there at the time, but that's not right. We all know the names of influencers. We all know the names of people who are only famous for shopping and for wearing clothes. I mean, why is that? Isn't that a kind of dysfunction at the heart of our civilization? And then finally, Cosmos, all 3 seasons of Cosmos have actually been seen in 181 countries. And their success has been completely cross-cultural. It transcends economic models and all of the demographics, completely across the board. And I think the reason it's successful is because it's not only concerned with the rigorous science, but unafraid of the goosebumps, the thrill, the emotion, the spirituality of understanding something about nature.
Thank you. I'll hand it back over to Lisa now.
So we have a couple more questions, and then I'll ask Nicole to just give you the news inside of what's been going on here at Cornell, the Carl Sagan Institute, as President Pollock so kindly introduced all of it. So we are like 15 different departments working on the forensic toolkits to try to find life in the universe, continuing Carl's legacy, so to speak. And I wanted to ask you a question. So from the time that we now found thousands of new worlds around other stars, how did that change your vision for cosmos, for what you can tell, for how we can connect to the universe, to the cosmos, our place in it, and maybe a far future of travel that we're just starting to lay out the map for now?
It has been thrilling. It has been thrilling. Remember when we did the original series, not a single exoplanet had ever been discovered. And, I mean, what I felt, I was at the Kepler launch, and then to see what all of the worlds that we have discovered, I think in some unscientific part of me, I knew they were there because, I think that the evidence, the idea, every time we think we're the only ones, it's just our little solar system, we're always wrong. And it was thrilling and exciting to begin not only to know that these worlds exist, but the variety of worlds and the ways, all the different kinds of planets and moons that could exist are just a foretaste of, an unimaginable additional amount of them that we will ultimately begin to discover. So it was thrilling. I felt the sadness. I wish I could have told Carl. He was alive for Beta Pictoris, but he never really got to see this almanac, this Encyclopedia Galactica that he dreamed of. It's thrilling. And for you at the Carl Sagan Institute, the idea of developing strategies for identifying the surfaces of these worlds and perhaps the possibility of life on them takes it to another level. That's why I'm so proud to be associated with the Carl Sagan Institute, not only for your groundbreaking work in this field, but also because of your consciousness about this planet and your efforts to protect it. So I never speak for Carl, but I'm sure he would be so happy to know this, that there's a Carl Sagan Institute at Cornell, and that Lisa and Nicole are at the helm. How wonderful.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I think we are getting to the full hour. So one of the things that I did want to do is I wanted to give you all a taste of what has been going on here at the Carl Sagan Institute lately, what kind of research we're doing and what kind of results we have been getting. And so again, thank you so much, Anne, for joining us today and giving us your insight into the cosmos and how it was to write and make Cosmos, how it is to live at Ithaca, and your life with Carl and your vision of the future for hopefully all of us in the long run, getting much better at this precipice of where we stand and find ourselves right now. The scientific, beautiful story that we hopefully can color in for everybody to partake and to not make it be this frightened thing when you and Carl and so many other people here at Cornell, but also all around the world, are actually spearheading to get everybody involved in the fascination that is this discovery, where we're living in the time. I sometimes think about it this way when somebody asks me about finding life in the universe. There were these thousands of years where we were basically looking at the sky and pondering whether or not we were alone, the feeling that we had that there must be other worlds out there. And now with the next telescopes coming up, the first chance, and the James Webb Space Telescope is going to launch end of this year, giving us the first chance to probe these other small worlds just the right distance from the stars for signs of life, trying to figure out if we're going to rewrite those history books, the epoch before we knew we were not alone. Hopefully that's going to happen in our generation. Of course, at the Carl Sagan Institute here, we are working hard on making it work in this generation and as soon as possible. But with that, I would like to pass it off to Nicole. As I said, Nicole Lewis is professor here in astronomy and the deputy director of the Carl Sagan Institute. And we just wanted to share some of the recent exciting scientific discoveries that have been going on here. Nicole?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And thank you so much, Anne. And thank you all for your questions. We didn't have time to answer all of them, but I've tried to note as many as I can, and maybe we can answer via Twitter or other media if possible. But I just wanted to give you a brief overview of sort of some of the exciting work that we're doing here at the Carl Sagan Institute. So I'm going to just share some slides ever so briefly. Bear with me. All right. So as Lisa mentioned, the Carl Sagan Institute here at Cornell, it was really founded with a prime idea that we want to ensure the legacy of all the wonderful work of Carl Sagan at Cornell and put Cornell at the forefront of the search for life beyond Earth. And so our mission is to, again, based on all of Carl's pioneering work, to form an interdisciplinary team and develop the forensic toolkit to find life in the universe. So both inside the solar system and outside of it, on planets and moons orbiting other stars. So we're bringing together a group of researchers here at Cornell. We have 36 faculty and senior researchers, plus lots of other researchers and students, graduate students, undergraduates from 15 departments here at Cornell. And they make up this vibrant interdisciplinary team that we call the Carl Sagan Institute. And the key thing is we do have this interdisciplinary team, which is relatively, unique in the world. And Cornell is the perfect place to do this based on the expertise that we have. And what we're doing is we're bringing together people with different sort of technical expertise. So everything from people who study planetary environments, planetary system formation, think about how life formed and evolved here on Earth, thinking about technosignatures, thinking about how do we build the next telescopes or spacecraft to explore the solar system and beyond. And we're bringing those people all together, and we're building this toolkit to find life in the universe. So I just want to highlight some recent news items that came out that involved members of the Carl Sagan Institute. And one of the most recent involved the recent Perseverance and Ingenuity on Mars. Perseverance, of course, is the rover that recently landed on Mars, and Ingenuity is the tiny little helicopter that could. And we've had lots of involvement from folks here at Cornell that are part of the Carl Sagan Institute. And so here they're exploring Mars and thinking about the past of Mars's history and its potential to support life. We also have people in the Carl Sagan Institute who are looking at life here on Earth. And so thinking about how could we use microbes to do things like extract rare earth elements and other ideas like that. So again, having that focus of both people looking beyond Earth and here at home is really what's going to be necessary for us to find life in the universe. We have people who are critically thinking about climate modeling and, of course, climate change. And there's now a Carl Sagan Institute climate model under development that is really aimed for public consumption and to allow other people to think about the process of climate change and understand it. So we really hope with this new climate model to be able to engage with the public, which is an important part of our mission as well. We've also recently have students who sent soil samples here from Ithaca up to the space station. And this is the first time that sort of native soils have been sent up to the space station. And really the idea here is to explore how can all of the microbes that exist in soil and other parts of the lifeblood of our soil, how does that react to the low gravity environment that's in space? And so this is a fun recent experiment, again, taking soil from here on Earth and putting it into space so we can start to think about what that means for future exploration. And then finally, we'll highlight a recent story close to home that involved many of the people that you've seen here during the talk. And that was thinking about, could life actually survive the death of its star? And so a lot of work went into thinking about how planets, what would happen when a planet actually, or when a star evolved and went into this white dwarf phase. Would we be able to study Earth-like planets around white dwarfs, and what that would look like specifically with the James Webb Space Telescope? And in fact, the James Webb Space Telescope will be looking at planets around white dwarfs during its first set of observations. I also want to highlight something that Ann kindly brought up earlier, which is that there's now a science communication minor. And this is actually an effort that's been led by our Director of Communications here at the Carl Sagan Institute. I think all of us realize how important science communication is to the Carl Sagan Institute and how that honors the legacy of Carl Sagan in particular. And then finally, I just want to highlight that if you want to know more about the Carl Sagan Institute or keep up to date with what we're doing and all the fun science that we're producing, feel free to visit our website. We have news items posted there as well. Follow us on Twitter, and then also come view our bevy of videos on YouTube. All right, with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to Lisa.
And so thank you so much, Nicole, for just giving you guys a taste, a flavor of what's been going on here. And one of the things I do want to mention that Ann was the person who gave us the seed funding for the Carl Sagan climate model, where we're trying to bring together the health and the beauty and the future and the past of our planet with people all over the world in high schools doing the work for us a little bit, and then like data mining what they find and letting them move the continents, letting them change change the differences in terms of CO2 or other gases. And so that is a project that we just started. So it's one of the things, again, as we said, that is bringing back this whole understanding of the planets around us to our own Earth and using that again to hopefully spot life in the universe out there if it exists. And of course, we have to say if, because we don't know. But I think I would paraphrase to say, wouldn't it be a waste of space if we were the only ones? And with that, I just want to thank everyone. So thank you so much, President Pollock, for being with us and introducing the event. Thank you so much, Anne, for giving us your time and your insights into this. And thank you so much, Nicole, for actually putting everything together and also fielding the questions here. And thank you, everyone, for participating today and putting your questions in. And as Nicole was saying, if you have other questions, just let us know. So you can follow us at the Carl Sagan Institute on Twitter or have a look at the website. See you another time. Bye, everyone.